Okay, we are live. Welcome to the final Boston Basic Income discussion. I'm Alex Howlett, and this week we're back to our 2-hour format, and the discussion is pretty much open to anything related to basic income or Boston Basic Income. I want to start by going around. Well, first, let me talk about how this whole thing got started. It was 2018, and I wanted people to talk to about basic income, and I didn't really have an outlet for that. So I went and posted on the basic income subreddit. I said, "Hey, is there anyone in Boston who has a basic income discussion group, anything like that?" And one fellow responded by the name of Richard. He said, "No, but." He would be interested in starting one. And unfortunately, Richard isn't here tonight. He's usually here. Maybe he'll pop in a little bit later. So I said, okay, let's do it. And we scheduled it for, meeting in person in a room in the basement of Bethany's office building. Bethany is my wife, and she's here tonight. She's usually here as well. And I said to Bethany on the way over, I said, if no one shows up, at least you and I will get to sit down and talk to each other about basic income for a couple hours. And so that was like, even that was kind of a win in my book. But it turned out that 3 other people showed up besides me and Bethany. And that was the beginning of something. After the second discussion, these were just in-person meetup discussions. After the second one, it was suggested that, hey, since we're doing it, we might as well live stream it on YouTube as well. So starting with the third one, we were live streaming on YouTube. And then when COVID hit, we were entirely online, and we were meeting on Zoom and still live streaming on YouTube. So it kind of organically shifted into this other thing. For a while, Derek Van Gorder was co-hosting with me, and he and I were doing it more in kind of a podcast format. That was late 2020, early 2021, and I guess we didn't really change the format of the discussions, but I was going back and editing the episodes and putting them out in audio form on the various podcast platforms. That ended up being too much work for me, so I stopped doing that after, I don't know, we were going for a few months there. But yeah, I mean, I think, initially I wanted people to talk to about basic income. I wanted to talk to people about this, and I thought it was really important. And I thought kind of the mainstream discussion of basic income was missing a lot of important stuff as well. Now I feel like I've gotten to a point where there's lots of opportunities to talk about basic income. Keep in mind that Andrew Yang was technically running for president, but he wasn't on anyone's radar yet in 2018. So it was kind of before this real, kind of popular basic income political push that occurred with the Andrew Yang political campaign. And it was before anyone really knew who I was too. And part of the reason why more people know who I am is because of Boston Basic Income. And I think, more people know who a lot of us are. If you've been attending these and people have been listening. So I think that's great. And I really think that the content we have on here and the kinds of discussions that we have are unlike things that are happening elsewhere in the basic income community and very valuable. That being said, I think right now is the right time to end it because we've kind of talked about a lot of the really important stuff already. And I don't think it's particularly useful to have the same conversations again and again. And all the content is there on the YouTube channel. And there are so many more opportunities for all of us, I think, to kind of get out there in the world and learn and, talk to more people about basic income and kind of the ideas surrounding it. So with that, now I want to go around the room. And we were doing introductions before we started the live stream, but we didn't get through everyone. So I want to start with the people who didn't get to do the introduction. So just anything you want to say about basic income, Boston Basic Income, reflections on the last 3 years or three and a half years, really, or anything coming up, like what you're excited about in the future from here on out. So we'll go to Robert and then Eddie and then Tommy. Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, thank you, Alex. I got to Boston Basic Income courtesy of Austin. Actually, he introduced me to it, and I'm something of a newcomer. I've only been here for 2 or 3 months, but I'm a retired newspaper editor here in Shepparton in Australia, and I write a column every fortnight for that newspaper still. And I've mentioned the basic income a few times. It's got broad support, or appears to have broad support in the community, but nobody of any influence will do anything about it. So it's an idea that people seem to like, but it's an idea that no one really wants to see happen. I don't quite understand what that's all about. But anyway, I've quite enjoyed these sessions. I'm sad they're folding, but I understand why they are. I enjoy them. Thank you, Alex. It's been great. Although it's been a short time, it's been great.
Yeah, I mean, it's been great having you. Yeah, go ahead.
I might add, I've also got a podcast called Climate Conversation, which I interviewed Alex for, and that was wonderful.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks so much for having me on. You guys can check that out on the podcast platforms as well. And I sent a link out on Twitter. So that was a great interview. And yeah, I know we're ending in terms of new content, but perhaps you haven't seen all the past videos. So there's maybe plenty to kind of work your way through. And I think that's true for a lot of people. Let's go to Eddie, and then Tommy, and then Bethany.
Hey everyone, I'm Eddie Chu. I found the Boston Basic Income discussion group I think in 2019 or 2020, maybe a year ago. I'm an investor trader, and I think about macroeconomics a lot. And after the Yang political campaign, I started thinking a lot about why the economy might need a UBI. And that's developed into what I'm calling capital consumption theory. And it looks at things like the low interest rates and the low capacity utilization and the stagnant wages that we've had from 1980 until now. It's been really great being in the group and discussing with everybody. I'm sad that we're ending we're ending this now. I'm really curious as to what Alex is moving on to, and I'll be looking forward to seeing what goes on there. If anybody else still wants to do more UBI and economics discussions, I have a really small bi-weekly capital consumption theory discussion group, and you can find me on Twitter. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Thanks, Alex, for having these. It's been really great.
Yeah, and I think, Eddie, you've been here longer than a year, because when we used to sit in a room and talk in person, and we'd have the YouTube live chat up on a big screen, and we'd all look at it. And Eddie was one of the people who would come on and make comments online. And sometimes we would respond to those comments on the in-person discussion. So we had some of that online interactivity even before COVID hit, and we moved the whole thing online. So you've been around a while, Eddie, and it's been great having you here. In terms of what I'm doing next, well, there's a lot. I've always been saying that I'm, kind of working on a book, and that's something that's coming along. I've got papers that I need to revise. In fact, this coming Monday, I'm giving a presentation at the Freiburg Institute for Basic Income Studies annual conference. I guess it's their first annual conference. So if it goes well, there'll be another one next year, I guess. But I'm presenting as part of the Funding Universal Basic Income group, and I'm presenting along with Jeff Crocker and another person. So
will it be online?
It will be online. So I will tweet out about that at some point in the next couple of days, because it's happening on Monday. So and the talk that I'm giving there is actually a kind of a version of the talk I gave at the Basic Income Earth Network Congress a few months ago, which should be posted online at some point. I signed a waiver and everything, but I was also presenting with two other people there, and they have to sign waivers, and there's a lot of logistical stuff. So that'll be online as well. Maybe this one from Monday will actually go up first, even though it's the newer version of the talk. Yeah, so that's happening. And then, yeah, there's a lot of reading that I'm doing in terms of monetary theory, economic theory. I'm part of a few discussion groups through the internet, through the Institute for New Economic Thinking Young Scholars Initiative. So we're reading all kinds of interesting stuff, inspired by Perry Merling's Money View. So he runs the Money and Banking MOOC that I always talk about. And so we've been reading like John Hicks and Hawtrey, and all kinds of interesting stuff there. So I'm talking about this stuff all the time, maybe with a bit of a different angle with different kinds of people. So it's gotten to the point where Boston Basic Income itself is a tiny part of what I'm doing in terms of kind of intellectual development and growth. But logistically, it was kind of taking up a lot of my time. So I think it's the right time to end it. But you'll see possibly more from me now that I have more free time, maybe more of me just going on Twitter and arguing with people, who knows. So let's go to Tommy, and then Bethany, and then Martin.
Hi, yeah, my name is Tommy. I'm a computer science guy. I started researching basic income shortly before Andrew Yang shortly before Andrew Yang got popular on the Joe Rogan podcast. And then I got excited about Andrew Yang and started the Santa Cruz Yang Gang. Let's see. As other people have said, I am a big fan of Alex's also. The work that Alex has been doing. Kind of like what Austin said, I saw how far Alex was able to take the intellectual stuff on basic income, and kind of just thought, boy, I'm glad somebody's doing that. I would probably have tried to walk that path, but somebody's already doing it. So I guess I get to do something else. It's kind of my feeling on it. So yeah, huge fan of what Alex has been able to do here. I think we're also kind of doing initial thoughts. The topic that I thought to bring up is participatory budgeting. I don't know if you guys have talked about that before, but it's something that I kind of heard of and seems like it might be related in concept to something like a basic income. So let's see. And I also want to drop off this Zoom call at the hour in about 40 minutes.
Well, tell us about participatory budgeting, because I'm not sure what that is.
Well, I looked it up. I watched a short informative video, and it's something like a democratic process for deciding a public budget.
So people pool their money together kind of voluntarily and then decide what to do with it, essentially?
I think it's something that people think of as like the government would decide that they want to use this participatory budgeting process to allocate the government budget, maybe for a local government or something like that. And the process was something like get a bunch of people to come up with project ideas, have a vote on the project ideas to figure out which ones are popular, and then the ones that kind of win that voting process make it into the budget.
Cool, interesting stuff. So let's go to Bethany, Martin, and then Derek.
Hi, yeah, I am Bethany, and as you heard, I'm Alex's wife, and I've been coming to these since the very beginning. And yeah, it turned out to be more than just me and Alex, which was great. So yeah, I've been really happy to see how many people have come in with their different ideas and been interested in joining in person and online from all over the world. And it's been very cool to see the development of the ideas and the crispness with which I feel Alex now describes a lot of these different things, which of course also kind of creates a certain amount of obsolescence for the group for him, because he's gotten so good at like thinking about these things, or he's recorded meetups with a lot of his ideas. But the ideas won't stop. I know. So it's exciting to see what Alex will do from here on out. And I know there are other cool, rich intellectual opportunities that have opened up. So yeah, thanks to everyone's participation, and it should be fun to have a final discussion tonight.
Yeah, I think we've all gotten a lot of practice talking about basic income, and I certainly am able to express myself a lot better than I was before. You and Bethany and everyone else kind of put me through the ringer every week on these various topics. So this has been huge. Let's go to Martin, Derek, and then Richard.
Hi, my name's Martin. I attended a number of the Boston meetings at first in person, and then some of them in the COVID we'll call it COVID era, I guess. But and so my background, so I'm actually a retired military officer and kind of an academic background in Soviet studies, which at least gives me a little bit of perspective on sort of a different economic system in whole or in part. But I really approached the group thinking in terms of fourth industrial revolution. So not something that I saw on the corner, probably much in the near future than perhaps some other participants. But I think there's an awful lot that's instructive in what's being thought about. The universal basic income could really inform what we call the fourth industrial revolution that's I believe is happening in a number of ways. And I think in terms of society accommodating those changes and the potential for those changes, that's going to be really tough. So I'm glad we're sort of thinking, at least in some way, about an approach to the citizens, what you might call claim to the economy. You might even say that way. And then the only thing I'll just sort of throw out there is I do wonder a little bit about kind of the framing of the term universal basic income. And I wonder if it would be helpful to begin to think of it as more of a universal basic dividend. And I say it only because there are a lot of people who own trusts or dividend producing. And so there's not sort of physical or mental labor associated with income, if you want to call it income, a dividend, something that they received. And society is perfectly okay with that. On the other hand, though, I feel as though when it is framed as basic income, it'll take society a while to sort of get their head around that. And I think society should get their head around that, because I'm a little bit of a fourth industrial revolution guy. But anyway, so just sort of throw that out there.
Yeah, it's great to see you on here, Martin. It's been a while. I remember initially we were a Facebook group, and then we switched to being a meetup. We were initially, a meetup group, and then I kind of dropped the meetup group and went entirely on Facebook. And then Martin stopped coming, and I ran into him at the library one time, and he's like, "Well, you're not on Meetup anymore, and I don't have Facebook." So he wasn't coming anymore. And then I was like, "Oh, maybe I should put it back on Meetup." So now we're both again. And yeah, it's been great having you part of the discussions, Martin, and it's good to see you again here for the last one. It's also great to see Derek. So Derek was, most of you know, Derek was the co-host for the period of time when we were doing the podcast thing earlier this year, and that was kind of one of the high points of Boston Basic Income, or one of like the main. I don't know. I felt like we were kind of like in our prime at that point. So definitely you can check out on anchor.fm, you can check out all the episodes that were edited for the podcast. And I'm pretty proud of those. And Derek was a huge part of that as well. So go ahead, Derek, initial thoughts for our final discussion.
Well, I'm glad to hear you feel I contributed in some small way. For my part, I'm really just grateful to have discovered the group and to discovered Alex's ideas. I met him a couple of years ago now, after sort of discovering basic income, and then having lots of questions about that, I ran into Alex in this sort of early New York City basic income scene. And then he was my guide into that world. I was new to it. Yeah, it's been very interesting. I had sort of been on a little quest before running into you folks for a while to kind of deliberately look for people with ideas that would be useful for solving kind of large scale problems in the world. I met a lot of interesting people over a short period of time, and this is sort of where I kind of ended up. This was the collection of ideas that sort of struck me as being intuitively as sort of being the most promising, or where I needed to focus my attention. So that's why I sort of stuck around here. I'm like everyone else, I'm sorry to see that it's wrapping up, but I'm also excited to I'm looking forward to what Alex is coming up with. For my part, my goal, my sort of goal coming away from this is to go back to what I used to do, which is making films. And I hope to make at least a short documentary kind of about basic income through the lens as it has been discussed on this group. If hopefully it'll be more than just a short, but that's my homework for the next year or so as people move on and things.
All right, fantastic. So yeah, people, you can feel free to start raising your hands now. We got a few more people's initial thoughts to go through, but if you raise your hand, I'll get to you after we get through everybody. So Richard is also here. I'm glad you're here, Richard, because you've been to almost every single one. And if it weren't for you, we wouldn't have done this thing, because you were the person on Reddit who responded to me initially and said you wanted to have a discussion group about basic income. So we can all thank Richard for helping get this started. So go ahead, Richard, and then we'll go to Conrad and then Brian.
Hello, I'm Richard. Well, I'm sort of interested in the whole fourth industrial revolution sort of thing, like Martin. In fact, I have a Facebook page called The Automated Economy, and I post articles like nanobots and automation and basic income and things. And I don't know. I'm not very good at this sort of thing. It's been a while since I even talked on this.
Yeah, that's fine. You've been a huge part of it, nevertheless. So thanks for being here, and thanks for being here with us all along. Nick Montz is pointing out the documentary Inherent Good, asking whether people have seen it. It's a documentary about basic income. I've seen it. I don't think it's very good, but maybe we can talk about that a little bit. I actually saw it a long time ago, or I saw it back when it first came out. So I don't have it fresh in my mind, but
thanks for the heads up. I just totally forgot about it. It's not marketed well.
Oh, really? I feel like they've been kind of at most of the conferences and stuff. They've been kind of doing a screening of it and having the producers and everybody come out and talk about it, that kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, you can watch it. I think it's kind of in line with the mainstream basic income stuff. Like I mean, I say it's not very good. It's really what basic income is about when you're not in this group talking about basic income with us. So it's not that it's bad. It's just about something different from kind of what we talk about. So let's go to Conrad, Brian, and then loop back around to Nick again. Or we'll skip Nick since you just talked. Or we'll go to Nick. Yeah, sorry. I'm indecisive. Yeah, go ahead, Conrad.
Hey, can you hear me? Yeah, speaking of documentaries, that makes me curious how you're gonna like ours. Sorry I'm late. I was kind of coming through Boston, and I hit a ton of traffic on I-90. There was a giant crash, so I sort of blame Massachusetts for my lateness. This group to me has been really interesting. I wish I could come more. There were a lot of weeks where I was a very fascinating topic, but I was grateful at the very least for the times I was able to come and come on, and the quality of the conversation and the guests and the participants in the audience. It was always thought provoking. I find a lot of the things where you come on and talk about basic income, you find yourself repeating yourself and saying the very fundamental level stuff, and dealing with very simple misunderstandings, but it was a lot more fulfilling on here and encouraging and always sort of intellectually stimulating. So yeah, I was happy to have been some part of it, and I was happy that it existed.
Well, that makes me happy to hear, Conrad, and it's always been good to have you on here. In terms of how I will feel about your documentary, I was there at that party where we watched the rough cut of the first episode. I thought it was really compelling. It's not relevant to how I think about basic income, right? So I'm not worried about how basic income affects people at a personal level. I'm worried about economic efficiency. But I found what I watched of you and Dea's documentary to be very kind of engaging and compelling. Like, it really pulled me in. I really cared about these people's lives. But I don't think, in terms of, discussing basic income, that's not kind of the angle I take. I probably, if you weren't here and someone asked in a random chat saying, "Oh, have you seen Bootstraps?" Would I say it isn't very good? I probably wouldn't say that, because I think it's trying to do something different enough that it doesn't kind of rub me the wrong way, the way Inherent Good did. So that's kind of my off the top of my head answer to that.
Yeah, I sort of said that a little bit in jest, knowing that it's very much not your angle.
Yeah.
But it's an angle that, seems to need filling. I think there's room for all the different angles in it.
Sure. Yep. Let's go to Brian, Nick, and then Austin.
Hey, my name is Brian, and I'm fortunate enough to live in New Hampshire, so about 60 miles away from Boston. And I got a chance to attend a few meetings before COVID hit. But Boston Basic Income, Alex, you've done a great job for all these years. I've really appreciated what a resource it was, and become really convinced that basic income is the way to solve a lot of problems in America, including poverty. Again, I know that's not your angle, but we can end poverty with universal basic income. And so I've decided to stop waiting for the cavalry to arrive and stop waiting for Congress to get its act together. And so I've formed a group, the American Union, to write our own legislative package for universal basic income and leverage our votes. So when Congress is up for re-election, if they want our votes, they can pass UBI. If they turn us down, we can vote them out. And your influence, Alex, is definitely there in the finished product, as well as a bunch of other people that I see here tonight. So thanks for letting me be part of it, and I look forward to seeing what you do next.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brian. And as far as poverty not being my angle is that when the way you get people their money is broken, it causes a lot of problems, and poverty is certainly one of them. Lack of freedom or a diminishment of freedom is another one. Another one is, it actually becomes a bad thing when, automation eliminates jobs. If everything's working the way it's supposed to be working, less work would be a good thing. But there's something broken in the way we get people their money that makes us afraid of losing jobs, that kind of thing. I kind of see, all the angles that, or I have my own perspective on all the angles that people talk about, and what's most important to them in terms of the problem basic income solves. And I really think all of those other problems derive from this one problem of, well, once you have a market economy and you need a mechanism to get money to consumers so the market can allocate resources for them, what's the most efficient way to get them their money? And if you don't use a basic income, you're using something broken instead. So go ahead, Nick, and then Austin, and then Chance.
Oh, are we doing introductions or just throwing stuff out there?
Just initial thoughts about basic income, Boston Basic Income, the future of basic income, anything.
Yeah, Brian, actually, I kind of want to piggy off what you were talking about, Brian. It's really interesting how you're looking to get a bill written. Ilhan Omar kind of put a basic income-ish bill out there recently. And, kind of when this started, we didn't know like Andrew Yang was going to blow up. And, right after that summer, we started getting our stimulus checks, that Hilton Harris X poll went above that 50% mark. It's almost like a milestone in the movement. Kind of, what do you kind of see like realistically happening in Congress throughout the next decade, kind of getting us there? It's going to be really interesting how it pans out, given that it's something that's really popular now. But of course, Congress isn't keen to what's popular is an entire body. Any thoughts on that, or what you think could possibly become, or is it going to take years for just the discussion around it to get better?
It's an interesting question. My feeling is that probably what's going to happen is we're going to have things that look more and more like basic income, and people are going to realize that they like
Child
them.
tax credit.
Child tax credit, exactly. So
It's been
if
nice.
we can keep that going, that's an important step. There are important ways in which that's not the same thing as a basic income, but it has some similar effects. And I think when people get used to something like that, it shifts kind of the Overton window, the realm of what's within, reasonable discussion, reasonable policy discussion. So I'm super excited that, I don't like that we have a pandemic, but I like some of the things that we've done in response to the pandemic with the stimulus checks and now the child tax credit. The unemployment insurance is a little more dicey because you have this whole problem where it punishes people for getting a job, that kind of thing. And then when people associate that with the idea of basic income, there's kind of some negative reactions there. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. In terms of my angle, I'm not worried about Congress. I'm worried about experts. I want experts to understand basic income. I want economists to understand basic income. And, as much as we've talked about basic income here in this group, it's still not a generally accepted thing among economists, especially macroeconomists. There are some economists who talk about micro stuff, like giving small amounts of money directly to people in Africa. So you see like Give Directly, and people like Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo actually won a Nobel Prize based on some basic income related stuff, but it's totally out of the realm of the kind of stuff we talk about here. It's more like if you have some money and you hand it to people directly, is that going to have a better effect than doing something else with the money or something like that? So that's certainly that's okay that they're talking about that, but it's not what I'd like to see economists talking about. Go ahead, Austin, Chance, and then Joan.
Hello. So, there's a lot I could say here. I guess to avoid repeating what I said in the pre-show, Alex's approach to sort of calibrated basic income as a macroeconomic tool is something that was that he's articulated really well, and it's influenced what and also to touch on what Brian was saying. What you're doing sounds a little bit like what we're doing in Australia with the basic income movement, because we've managed to get a fairly coherent national group together over the last year or two that's in touch with all of the various academics and labs and stuff. And what we're doing is we're going to put together a policy proposal. We're going to sort of take it to try and start a basic income or a Labor for basic income group, Labor's Out Democrats, a Greens for basic income group, like start groups within all the political parties to push that agenda. And the agenda that we're pushing is based on to a large extent the kind of thinking that Alex has pioneered. So what we're actually suggesting is that that you don't think of it as a replacement for welfare, right? And you just introduce it as this new macroeconomic tool. And then what you're aiming for is we already have a federal welfare system in place. Like we already have unemployment payments that are paid at the federal level. So this would be a policy that would then top that up, right? Is what we're suggesting is that so you manage the two needs, the two reasons people suggest basic income are poverty reduction and macroeconomic tool. And we think in the Australian context, we can square that circle by having it at a level which is not the poverty line, which then tops up the existing welfare payments to the poverty line. And then from there, you calibrate around, and it's been introduced as this macroeconomic tool. And, I don't think that we would be articulating the approach the way we are if it hadn't been for Alex's input and Boston Basic Income.
Wow, that's awesome. That's great to hear, Austin. I never really, going into this, imagined having, kind of any influence on any policy or political anything. I was mostly thinking about, one, understanding it as well as possible myself, and then two, kind of connecting with experts and kind of coming together on understanding it hopefully with economists, that kind of thing.
I'll show you my presentation. You have to give me some feedback.
Awesome. Yeah, I would love to take a look at that. Let's go to Chance and then Joan, and then we'll get to the hand raisings.
Yeah, so I started out, looking for ways to fund basic income like most people do, and sort of, I stumbled into like Mark Walker's book, if you've ever heard of that. It's like Free Money for All. VAT taxes, like increased wealth taxes, new federal budgets, stuff like that. Cut spending and on healthcare, but then and I also thought, like, to point out the other two sort of best arguments I was alluding to earlier. I think they're both social justice sort of approaches, and I Widerquist and Van Paris are pretty undisputably, the best defenders of like the social justice aspect of this, and they both take different angles, and so I think from that angle, those were already sort of locked down. But then trying to figure out this economic situation, I've come to the conclusion that really I'm kind of scared that if we do anything other than what Alex does wants us to do at this point, that we're going to screw it up, and we're gonna have blowback after we get it going, even if we did get like something like a basic income funded through taxes going. And so now I'm such an advocate. I also want to see, like, if I meet Andrew Yang again, I'm going to be like, hey, Alex Howlett, he's probably already heard of you, I hope, but and also like my wife, like her dad is like kind of influential in politics in Malaysia, and so talk to him, I'll be like, dude, let's do this. No. So who knows, like, and that's why I want to say thank you to everybody, because like you're all doing this. Everyone who's here is like just pushing and pushing, and we just need to keep doing this. And I think eventually good ideas do just float to the top. So yeah, just keep at it. And this has been a blast. So.
Yeah, I've met Andrew Yang a few times, but we never really kind of sat down and had a meeting or anything like that. There was one time where he was doing a rally here in Cambridge at Cambridge Common, and we needed a place to put him ahead of the rally. So we put him in this room over here, in a conference room next to the room that I'm currently in. We kind of sneaked him in here because they didn't want anyway, so I've met him a few times. I would have loved to have had a real conversation with him. There was back in 2018, actually, when we were first getting started, we had Andrew Yang tentatively scheduled to Skype in to one of our in-person discussions, and he ended up having another commitment that day, and that was like fall of 2018. And then in the following winter, a few months later in 2019, I had talked to some of his people, and the next time he was in Boston, he was going to have a sit-down meeting with me, and we were going to talk about things, and I was really excited about that. But then he went on Joe Rogan right before that and got really popular, and then canceled. So that's how it goes. I think he'd be a really interesting person to talk to at some point, but I also think he's kind of locked in politically to what he's doing now. So I don't know how much intellectual flexibility he has at this point. Early on, I thought, like, oh well, this is someone who's open to ideas and is clearly acting on that, and that was really cool. Let's go to Joan.
Yeah, so I have a lot of different threads here, but mostly been really impressed with the way that my thinking has been provoked by the idea of basic income. And what is work? I mean, the question of work has come up over and over again, and to examine assumptions is really what this has been for me, to examine the assumption of how do you get money? Why shouldn't everybody work? Why should not some people not work? Why do you measure somebody's worth by what they do for work? All of that stuff comes in. And so in a philosophical way, I've been provoked by this. I've also been able to learn a lot. I've been impressed by Alex's ability, like his dad's ability, to cut through and simplify something to the point where you end up with something like giving people money. You solve problems of money by giving people money. I mean, directly. So what could be simpler than that? And yet, that's not something that has ever been tried. It's always been means tested, or there's the kind of puritanical background of the morality of not working versus working, and how do you reward somebody versus how do you punish somebody. And it's all through the idea of a kind of moral backing that Alex has stripped away from the conversation. And in this discussion group, I've left many times thinking, oh, I wish, this had been true in, decades ago, and because I'm a writer and a poet, and all of the jobs that I had to take to get money. And what was the worth of that? It was taking my time away from the things that I needed to do. And so I'm just one person in that realm, but I'm sure there are many, many other people who consider work like childcare, and Andrew Yang made this point a number of times, caring for elderly relatives, or things that you do that are work but are not compensated. So where did this idea come from that everything has to be in the realm of compensation, otherwise it's not worthwhile? So those are things that have always been provocative through these meetings for me. I've been over my head a lot in terms of how the central bank works and how the monetary system is constructed, and the stuff that Alex knows about. But it also has given me a lot of confidence in the fronting of the ideas that he has, that he actually has the intellectual background and backup to be able to persuade. And I just feel like, and maybe because I'm his mom, but he hasn't yet reached enough people, because we all know, and if you've talked to him and you've listened to him, we know that he has that backup, and he has the kind of point of view and points of view that are really, really worth everything to society to follow through on. So the political part, we don't talk about that so much. I'm sorry to hear that Yang has decided to be an independent, actually. I think that's a mistake, but that's a whole other part of this. And Alex really didn't want to delve into that part, and I understand why. That's the practical, how do you get it done part. But in terms of the purity of the ideas, no question. And it's been great. It's been great. I've learned a lot, and I've felt always there's an intellectual core that I respect.
Wow, thank you. Yeah. When you can get your mom to show up, you don't have to pay anyone to say all those things.
Right.
Excuse me,
Free
Alex.
endorsements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Robert.
Excuse me, Alex. We've got son, mother, and wife. We've got all different family names. What's the story there? I can't help but ask.
Yeah. So my mom, her maiden name is Houlihan, and then Bethany kept her name when we got married. Pretty straightforward, I guess. Yeah. So I have my dad's name.
Okay,
What's interesting though is that Bethany and I have a daughter, and our daughter Annabelle has Bethany's last name, Annabelle Burham, because we decided to do it based on gender. So we had a girl, and she gets Bethany's last name. Yeah,
it's great stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, basic income is a very simple thing, and it's often viewed as a simplistic thing, as people are oversimplifying when they're asking for basic income. And you know what, to be honest, most people are when they're talking about basic income. They're just thinking free money, and they're not thinking about it too deeply, or they have explanations that are kind of incomplete, that kind of thing. And you mentioned that sometimes these conversations go over your head. Full disclosure, I've been over my head a lot in these conversations as well. And
join the crowd.
Yeah, you guys kind of keeping me honest, and everybody keeping each other honest. It provides an incentive to learn more, and to be more right, and to be less wrong, I suppose, right. Is another way to put it. So you brought up, Joan, this whole kind of culture of work, and a question I like to ask is, why is there such a thing as a job in the first place? And the answer isn't to get people money. It's because there's work that wouldn't get done unless you paid people to do it. right? So if everybody did all of society's necessary work, there'd be no such thing as a job if they just naturally did that. And it's true that there's a lot of work, like you were mentioning, care work, that kind of stuff. A lot of the work that we do, most of the work that we do, is not paid. Jobs are only for when we need to get people to do something different, or paying people to spend their time doing something different. But when we're using the labor market as our mechanism for pushing money to consumers, then we're distorting jobs away from that basic purpose that they have. Go ahead, Bethany.
Yeah, hi. So first, I wanted to say before, it's nice to see people here who we haven't seen for a little while for the last one. So for you, Alex, or for the general discussion, two things. One, I kind of resonate with Martin's point about framing in terms of, I know you don't tend to get into the practical side of how to persuade people, but it does seem like, why not take something that is already associated with not working and use that word, as opposed to something that is very pointedly associated with working and use that word. So income versus dividend is kind of interesting. I could imagine a counter argument like, well, like dividend implies that it's like coming from something specific, but I think it could be a dividend from like the whole economy or something. So that's my first point. And then second, since we're closing, I just wanted to see if you think there are big intellectual kind of unanswered questions for you about basic income or the economics behind it, or if you're kind of more in the stage of trying to persuade others or get the ideas out there. So that's my second question.
Yeah, so I can talk about, kind of some of the most recent insights I've had. And the way I usually operate is that I isolate basic income from other things. And I figure out which things are really part of the core of what I need to talk about, and then which things are separate issues. So I've recently split something off from kind of the conversation that I want to have about basic income. And that has to do with rich people accumulating money. Where does the money go in the economy? So basic income is a solution to the problem of where the money comes from. Where do consumers get their money? And then they spend their money to be able to buy stuff. On the other end of things, there are people accumulating money and getting richer and richer and richer. And that's potentially a problem. But that's not a problem that basic income addresses. So we can think about, potential solutions to that problem. You can talk about taxes. You can talk about, the government providing services that people want to pay for to kind of soak up some of that money, that kind of stuff. But really, this is a separate problem from the problem basic income solves. And when you're thinking of basic income being funded by taxes, of course, they're, kind of one and the same. So the first step, which I took a long time ago, is to separate the idea of paying out a basic income as the mechanism for getting money into the economy. Where does the economy's money come from tying that to tax revenue or something like that? Because if you're tying it to tax revenue, then you're not answering the question of where the economy's money comes from, because you're literally forcing yourself to take away money from the economy to be able to pay money back into the economy. So then you're stuck with this problem where the private financial sector is printing our economy's money for us because we don't want the government to run a deficit, that kind of thing. But it doesn't answer the question. And this is something that Austin has kind of pushed me on a lot as well. And I kind of thank him for that. And the question is, how do you prevent, some quintillionaire from getting so rich that even if he has good intentions, then, he could do the equivalent of dropping a quarter on the sidewalk from his perspective and disrupt the economy for everyone else or something like that. So we need to address this problem. And there are various things we can talk about. But I've decided recently that this is a side point, right? This is not central to basic income, because this is going to be a problem that you have regardless of where your economy's money comes from. Regardless of what the mechanism for introducing money into the economy, you're going to have to figure out a good way to, remove the money from the economy or decide how to handle the accumulation of money effectively in a way that doesn't disrupt the economy, doesn't disrupt the markets, that kind of thing. So this is a problem we have now. This is a problem we have now with money that's being created through the private financial sector. We're using monetary stimulus to keep interest rates low, and that's where our money is coming from. And then it's being transformed. When people save their money, it's being transformed into other kinds of assets, that kind of thing. The government is selling treasury debt in order to soak up the cash, but it's still the money, right? It's still the wealth. It's still accumulating in some form of asset. So these are problems that I haven't thought through as deeply as basic income, but I feel confident about the basic income side of things, or I feel fairly confident about the basic income side of things as, a mechanism for getting money to consumers. An alternative to kind of what we do now, which is, an unstable, overstimulated financial sector, asset bubbles, and, that's all, in service of propping up demand by making it easier for businesses to hire people, to prop up wages, that kind of stuff. We don't need any of that. We can skip all of that with basic income. Yeah, go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, look, I wanted to say one of the things that I've got from this group is a better understanding, though, of the effect of that loose monetary policy on inequality as well. Like, I kind of had a sense of it, but it's been a good place to really explore it. One of the things is like last year, sometime I wrote a blog, could it be how a basic income could lower housing prices, right? In Australia. And that's the kind of thing which it sounds crazy if you don't have this perspective of of the problems caused by a lack of a basic income. If you start from like the problems caused by the lack of the vote, you couldn't list them all until after you had the vote, right? But we can list some of the problems caused by the lack of a basic income, and one of them is these low interest rates, which drive inequality in some really ugly ways. And in Australia, we're seeing that now. New Zealand just had it, this catastrophic spike in house prices, and Australia is heading into the same thing, basically because of loose financial policy. And we were talking about, I attended a Labor Party event about housing, right? And the guy from the Labor Party who was there, Jason Clare, for anyone who's listening, said, oh, well, we say we want to increase interest rates and that'll bring down house prices, but we can't do that because that'll cause unemployment, right? And that'll hurt people. And it's like, well, this is the problem with having everything all tangled together the way it currently is, and we need to have, if we had that independent source of spending money for people, we would have a totally different set of financial and regulatory settings, which would be a bigger threat to the extreme wealth of someone like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos than taxes, because it would actually affect the asset prices. It would affect the conditions that create these massive asset prices. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And housing in particular is interesting because it's two things. It's, something that people need to buy for their livelihoods, and it's included in, the consumer price index and all of that, the purchasing power of money. Housing is relevant for that. But it's also an investment asset. It behaves like a financial asset in a lot of ways. Other financial assets, strictly financial assets, like, stocks and bonds and money itself, are not included in the consumer price index because those are not, goods and services that consumers need to buy in order to kind of live their lives, that kind of thing. So housing straddles that line, and it has interesting effects because its prices move kind of according to, okay, interest rates are low, now we can get mortgages, and that drives up housing prices. And you have a housing bubble, which is an asset bubble, but it's also this, it's an asset bubble in something that ordinary people need. So that's there's this interesting entanglement there. But I agree with you. The question is, well, why not raise interest rates to lower housing prices? Yeah, that would work. It would work great. It might be a little bit disorderly in terms of, there are people who bought houses as investments, and, they had certain expectations about what the price of the home would be in the future. And then those expectations aren't met. And then they borrowed based on those expectations. They're not going to be able to roll over those debts, that kind of thing. So there's going to be a little bit of a kind of a disordered deleveraging, but yeah, it's going to get your housing prices down. And ultimately basic income, of course, it allows you not to, the alternative to low interest rates is basic income, right? These are the alternatives. The mechanism that we use to get people their money is keeping interest rates low and driving up asset prices, like housing prices, that kind of thing. We're not driving up asset prices to provide consumer demand, but making borrowing cheaper allows businesses to hire people and give people more wages, that kind of thing, less unemployment, as you were also saying, Austin. Higher interest rates, yeah, it's going to eliminate jobs. It's going to cause businesses to fail, the ones that can't handle the higher cost of borrowing. But that's fine, because we're using if we have basic income, we're using an alternative mechanism to get people their money, not what we've been doing in the past. So we can skip all of the financial market stuff. There's probably going to be some turbulence during the transition. So you can talk about that, or you can talk about, a world without basic income compared to a world with basic income, assuming you've made the transition and, you're going to have a better world with basic income. But the transition is also, it's not going to be as bad as if we just jacked up interest rates without having a basic income, right? That would be disastrous to the economy, because you're not replacing people's source of money with something else. So you can't just on your own jack up interest rates to bring housing prices down or to nip asset bubbles in the bud. But if you have a basic income, yeah, go ahead.
And the way I would be selling, and this is what I believe, I'm curious to hear what you think, is that in the current situation, as you're decreasing interest rates, if you're introducing this new payment, especially if it's not, a fully livable amount, right? If it's just a supplement, during that transition, by raising that, you're going to actually be driving employment, because people are going to be spending money. You're going to be managing aggregate demand, and you may not see as much of an overall. You wouldn't see as much of an overall drop in unemployment. It's not just that, well, people will have more money when they're unemployed, so they'll be okay. It's that those people having that money will actually prevent sort of a wildfire of job loss in the current environment where we're still expecting people to make most of their income from labor at the beginning of the transition,
Yeah, it's a little bit trickier than that. So for any level of basic income, say you're having, just a small basic income, that's going to imply a certain amount of raising of interest rates. And the problem with tightening credit, so raising interest rates tightens credit in the financial markets. And the problem with that is that it's never smooth when credit tightens, right? It's always, okay, now someone can't make a payment on their debt, and then the person they owed money to can't make a payment on their debt. So you have this kind of cascading chain of defaults. I don't know that there's a clean way around that. Certainly the basic income itself, on average, is kind of going to smooth things out a little bit. But the people who are defaulting are not the average ones. They're all kind of, there are some people who are being affected to the extreme, and then some people who are being affected kind of not at all. And the basic income kind of goes to everyone evenly. So there's going to be a rough transition, and there are ways to mitigate that. You can have promise of higher interest rates in the future, and then everyone kind of expects that, and then gradually they'll kind of pay down the debts they already have, that's a whole other point of research. Like, you would want to probably figure out how to do this as smoothly as possible, and it takes more than just gradually increasing the amount of the basic income, right? Go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, so but if we had in the world where we have a basic income, we don't climb up into these massive over-leveraged contortions to start with, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. So the question isn't like, okay, how do we properly manage a basic income world? That's easy. That's much easier than it is for managing our current economy. Managing our current economy, you have to think about monetary policy, interest rates, financial instability, all of that stuff. You don't have to worry about any of that in a basic income world. You just have to get the basic income to the right level, and then the monetary authority of the central bank will get interest rates to the right level that you don't have this instability and these asset bubbles in the first place. So there's no bubble that's going to collapse. There's nothing that's going to crash in the first place. But in the transition from today's world to a basic income world, there does involve a tightening of credit, and that can cause turmoil in the financial markets, or anyone that's exposed to the financial markets, even if you're not hurting the everyday person as much. There are a lot of people who are receiving the basic income who aren't really directly exposed to the financial markets, maybe just through their jobs, that kind of thing. So people are probably going to lose their jobs. It's not a simple thing, is all I'm saying. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I would be curious as to, in the real world, in the world that we are in without a basic income, I mean, what do you see as the macroeconomic picture going forward? Because it feels to me like, based on this overall framework, right, that you've developed, there is a certain amount of certainty about how things that we're doing things wrong. How much certainty is there about the consequences of that, right? Like, the way I see it is that, okay, we've kind of got two options for macroeconomic management in that. So you don't spend enough, you don't spend enough and you keep relying on low interest rates to stimulate the economy. And that's bad. And that leads to a bubble that collapses under its own weight eventually, right? And then on the other hand, you take the child tax credit and you double down on that and you do more and you push inflation up a little bit, and then you have a collapse in these financial markets. And it's kind of like, well, either Wall Street or Main Street has to cop it in this, not just in the transition to a basic income, one way or another, right? And I feel like we're kind of heading towards some kind of limit moment, like 2008, the Australian house prices remind us of the subprime crisis and blah, blah, blah. What do you think? Is that, I mean, and from a basic income point of view, that's when we say, okay, here we have a solution, is during that crisis, right? So we're positioned for that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. If you just wait for the crisis and then introduce the basic income, then the introduction of basic income isn't going to cause the crisis. So I think that's a good point. And to some extent, it looked a little bit like that. We didn't have a basic income during the COVID crisis, but during the crisis we started implementing things that had some similarities with basic income. So I think you basically have that right. I think in a world without basic income, the way it works is that we're always moving toward the next crisis because we're printing money in the private sector. Our money is based on unstable private sector debt that balloons and causes asset bubbles. And then eventually you start to have a credit collapse, a credit contraction, and the government steps in to backstop some of that private debt, some of those private markets. And then what happens at that point is the debt that was initially created as private debt becomes government debt. It was initially started as privately created money, and then it becomes, government-backed money. And then you do enough of that the process can start again. So we kind of go up in fits and starts. We get the private money, and then it collapses, but the government, holds on to some chunk of that. So you're higher than you were at the last crisis, and then you kind of repeat that cycle over and over again. And that's the business cycle. As far as interest rates go, see you later, Nick. Thanks for coming out. As far as interest rates go, interest rates have been at zero. So we've been doing other things besides lowering interest rates, because you can't really lower them much beyond zero. But we've been doing other things to promote credit creation in the private financial sector. If what you notice about monetary policies is that it's promoting easy credit, it's doing that kind of thing, there's no limit to how much of that you can do. It looks like a hard limit when you're at zero for the interest rates, but there are really other things we can do to boost private sector credit creation. And it has the same effect. It has the same destabilizing effect at the same time that it props up consumer demand and consumer prices. So let's go to Eddie. Go ahead, Eddie.
So I want to take a stab at a question that you asked a little bit back or talked about, which is, where does the money go? And, money sort of accumulating with the wealthy. And then I want to plug my next episode because it's relevant to what you're talking about now. So, the money that goes to the wealthy, in a healthy economy and to some degree, even in this economy, that money gets invested in, more factories, more technology, more productivity growth. If you talk about stocks and bonds, those also indirectly, investors give their money to companies, and then companies then take that money, invest into more factories, more technology, more productivity growth. So, the money that goes to the top really actually ends up increasing the capacity of the economy. And so that is a fundamental question. The thing that goes wrong is where the spending in the economy is not enough to actually use all of that stuff. And so, that's the simple, problem that basic income solves, that also, solves sort of every other problem. Also, you guys are talking about a little bit like crises of confidence and in the economy. And I've been thinking about this lately, and I split it up into 4 different types. You have spending crises, you have asset crises, you have currency crises, and you have debt crises. 4 different types. And I'm planning to talk about that in my next episode. So if anybody's interested in that, these are all different types of crises, which are a little bit unstable. They have sort of self-reinforcing modes, upwards and downwards. But at the end of the day, the thing that you really care about is just spending versus capacity. And so you have this instability because you're sort of warping, the system. But the simple answer is, all you have to worry about is just, do you have enough spending to keep everything occupied? And that includes both capital and labor, because those 2 things substitute for each other. And so whenever you get not enough, you get not enough of utilization of both of those. You get low interest rates, and you also get stagnant wages because labor demand is not enough.
Yeah, so there's 2 questions that we can kind of ask, like framing questions. One is, where do consumers get their money? And then another question is, where does money get invested? And I think if you're stimulating investment for the purpose of getting consumers their money, then consumers are not going to get money efficiently, and money is not going to get invested efficiently or productively. So money is, when money gets invested, it's not necessarily going to be productively invested if it's not profitable to produce things for consumers who don't have money to spend or don't have adequate money to spend. So there's all kinds of inefficiencies in there. By not having a basic income, we are creating certainly an inefficiency in the labor market, inefficiency in consumers not being able to buy what the economy is capable of producing for them, but also inefficiency in terms of capital investment and real capital formation. So I just wanted to point that out there. It's not the case that the money is getting invested. It's not as simple as just saying that the money is getting invested in real productive capacity and consumers are not activating that capacity. Because if consumers are not activating that capacity, then that capacity is not going to be built in the first place. If consumers don't have the money to spend, why would I invest in a project that's designed to sell things to people who don't have any money? So there's kind of problems at a bunch of different levels there. Now, in terms of, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you're absolutely right about that. And that is, what like most economists out there right now, sort of completely miss or don't talk about.
Yeah. So in terms of crises of confidence, I'm not really talking about crises of confidence when I'm talking about a credit collapse or credit contraction, disorder, deleveraging, that kind of thing. It's less about a crisis of confidence and more about, what Perry Marilyn calls the survival constraint, when the survival constraint binds. So someone owes me money, they don't pay, now I can't make my payments. So if I can't make my payments and that doesn't cause another person to not be able to make their payments, then it kind of stops with me, right? There's 2 dominoes that fall over and then there's no next domino to hit. So then it's fine. But what happens is, as private credit builds up in the economy, as everybody's balance sheets become more interconnected, more people's debts depend on other people's debts and the dominoes get closer together. So it doesn't really matter what the triggering event is for the crisis per se. What matters is that the dominoes are close together, close enough together that you knock over one, it knocks over all the rest of them. So that's kind of what the collapse is about. And no one has to have any psychology or anything. There doesn't have to be any wavering of confidence. I think, obviously confidence is affected if all the dominoes are falling down. That's horrible. And people are going to feel really bad when that happens. But the dominoes fall down on their own, regardless of how people are feeling. So it's not a crisis of confidence when you have this kind of credit contraction. It's an automatic process that is kind of unavoidable unless you give people a lifeline, unless you give people access to funding that allows them to meet their obligations. So that's kind of what we did after 2008, right? With QE and other policies, we kind of backstopped people's liquidity so that maybe some dominoes fell over, but then you kind of fortified the next domino so that it was fine, and then the chain reaction stopped. And that's kind of what we did in the COVID crisis as well, and in sort of some other areas in the money market. But it's not. Yeah, I want to emphasize that it doesn't have to be a psychological thing at all when the market crashes. Go ahead, Derek.
I wanted to briefly reinforce something you said earlier. It's a point that I found one of the most striking points when I first sort of discovered your perspective on things, was this idea that you were saying it's important to recognize that you can't run out of ways to keep up that credit expansion, and you can keep coming up. Even if you reach interest rates at zero, you can keep coming up with ways to find other, to boost the market in that way. And I think that's a really important point. It emphasizes to me the value of your approach of kind of narrowing in on basic income specifically. Obviously, you could call it something else, a basic dividend, a base income, whatever, that doesn't matter. But the specific advantages of that mechanism, because all these other mechanisms, the monetary and fiscal equivalents, these kind of other ways of giving people money, they do help people, right? The economy is much better off keeping interest rates really low and finding other ways to expand credit than if you weren't doing that and you just sort of left things the way they were, right? So there's a lot of really sort of seemingly helpful things we can do and get better at for a long time, but they're not going to address these fundamental problems and the problems caused by those fundamental problems that people are actually trying to solve. So for me, it just emphasizes again the value of that simple approach. My question to you would sort of be, I think you've had a little more opportunity to talk with not as many experts as you'd like, but at least a few in the process of doing this show and your other ventures. How have you found it sort of talking with people, on this show? You've met people like me and other people who were not really necessarily well exposed to these concepts before. How has your experience been discussing these ideas specifically, if you've had that opportunity, with people who are experts in economics or would consider themselves, very well versed in existing theories? Do they understand what you're talking about, or is there actually more of an obstacle than when talking with a sort of a layman because of the sort of accumulated assumptions and things?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it's both. It's both easier and harder to talk to economists than lay people. I find that the easiest people to talk to, kind of where I feel like I can make the most headway, is economists, because the way they think allows them to kind of dispassionately, look at, okay, well, what's his model, and they're trying to like piece it together, and I'm obviously trying to help them with that. But economists and basic income skeptics, I find, are a lot easier to talk to than basic income supporters, because basic income supporters kind of have their ideology, their pro-basic income ideology locked in, and it can be, there's a lot of things that they assume that I agree with them on, where I'm really nowhere near on the same page. And that can be difficult to untangle. Whereas, economists have a systematic way of thinking about things. It's really easy to communicate with them. And then basic income skeptics don't have the kind of preconceived pro-basic income ideology. So I can engage with them, without them assuming that I mean something that I don't. Depending. There are certain basic income opponents or basic income skeptics who are really kind of steeped in being anti-basic income. So we see this kind of from the MMT crowd. Those people are somewhat more difficult to engage with than maybe a lay person who is anti-basic income, because they think everybody has to work, and they haven't really thought about it that deeply. They think of basic income as a simplistic thing, that kind of thing. So it really depends. Usually when I'm talking to economists, I'm trying to get at something that I'm trying to understand better. So something, like more specific things about, the nature of money, monetary theory, oftentimes in discussions, that I have with, the money view groups, reading groups, and, that kind of stuff. We don't even bring up the topic of basic income, but obviously my ideas about how money works are central to my understanding of basic income. And we talk about those a lot. And I find that really useful and really fruitful to talk to economic minded thinkers about that stuff. Economists, of course, do not, macroeconomists often abstract away from money. So they think about goods in terms of goods, and the money is facilitating kind of just a goods for goods interaction. Like it's just kind of this medium that greases the wheels of trade, that kind of thing. So that can be challenging. But the people I talk to tend to be people who are already interested in money. Maybe they're not thinking about basic income, but they're thinking about money on some level. So I find that that's like a nice sweet spot, people who think like economists, but are also thinking about money. I think there's this kind of, I like how straightforward economics is, right? A macroeconomist might assume that there's kind of a default world where everyone's producing for themselves, and then, okay, now they're able to trade with each other and they can specialize and all be better off because they're all trading with each other. They, if trading with each other didn't make them better off, then they wouldn't trade and they'd be exactly where they started, that kind of thing. And the thing that everybody has to trade is kind of their labor. And then if people aren't able to trade their labor, then there's something, there's some kind of market failure or something like that, and it needs to be compensated for. So there's kind of this, there's some problem in the economy. We don't know what it is, but if we fix it, then there's going to be full employment or something like that. So there's kind of this assumption in mainstream economics that the fact that we're not at full employment is due to some kind of friction or interference. Libertarians would say that it's the government getting in the way, and non-libertarians would say that the government needs to be the one to kind of address the problem that maybe is fundamental to how markets work or something like that. I think both sides are wrong. I think markets are not flawed. They're only flawed when you expect them to do things that they're not going to do, like give everyone money through jobs or something like that. That's what basic income is for. So you give people money through the basic income, and then the market can allocate resources for them. They can buy things on the market. So yeah, anyone else have any questions before we kind of go around and get final thoughts? All right, so let's do the same order that we did at the beginning. A couple of people have dropped off, so we'll go through, we'll do Austin, Chance, and then Joan. Go ahead, Austin.
Hey, hard to know what to say. My last chance to butt in on a Boston basic income conversation. Look, it's been great. Thanks.
All right. Well, I hope other people have more to say than Austin. Otherwise, we'll be ending early. Let's go to Chance, Joan, and then Robert.
Yeah. So, I guess one of the thoughts I was having, actually, this is going to sound like a strange angle to come at basic income, but I used to at the University of Iowa, just, it was before I was into philosophy. I was into philosophy. I just didn't know it. And people would come in, and they'd meet at the Pentecrest where this big lawn is and stuff. And they'd have political signs, and then everyone would be debating on these different subjects. And I'd be really I like to talk about philosophy and religion and all this stuff. So I'd always be kind of disappointed because I would spend maybe 2-3 hours out on the lawn, talking to somebody, and then, we'd have to go to class or whatever. And I always thought, when I started thinking about basic income, I was like, man, I wish I could just do this all the time. I wish I could live a Socrates style life, where I just go around asking people questions and figuring out what their thoughts are. And it occurred to me, if this is one of those, this is the kind of the hook of basic income for a lot of people, myself included, unfortunately. But you sort of fantasize about all the freedom, and you start thinking like, man, what could I do with all that freedom? But I think it's one of the great tragedies of our society that that we don't allocate the time to like have deep, thoughtful discussions for long periods of time on singular topics. And it's because we're usually too busy chasing like a paycheck or whatever. We're just too busy with day-to-day life. And it always felt like to me unnecessarily so. And so it's just we need more of this kind of dialogue that we're having right now. We need more forums like this. And yeah, I don't know. Like I guess that to me that seems like connected to the freedom to sort of opt out of labor that's not necessarily fulfilling to you. And so like I don't know, it's just like I'm just really glad that we had this opportunity to have a long, thoughtful discussion. And I think before I stop here, it pays dividends. Like look, I mean, Alex, you already alluded to this. Like it, even if you think you're right about something and you start out pursuing it, it's just so helpful to have like this long dialogue, like literally like a 3-year dialogue. And by the end of it, you're like a master of this subject, and I think that like like we all played midwife to Alex's like ideas here, and we helped like the birthing process, and now we've got this beautiful baby called CMT that we can share with the rest of the world, and it's just because we bothered to take the time to do this. That's all I'll say for now.
Yeah, I think the freedom thing is important, and I can understand why that's the angle that so many people come at it from, including you mentioned Carl Widerquist and Philippe von Parijs. And it's true, right? Like if we are employing people, if we are paying people to do something other than what they would ordinarily want to do, that's taking away their freedom to some extent, right? And to some extent, we need to do that, right? We need to keep the basic income low enough that there's enough incentive for people to go out and work jobs. But we wouldn't want to do more of that. We wouldn't want to take more of people's freedom away than necessary to get the desired labor done in the economy. So that, again, kind of comes back to this idea that we're using the labor market to get people their money. That means we are employing people as an excuse to give them money. We're taking away their freedom as, so they can feel like, or so we can all feel like they earned their money. And that is incredibly wasteful of people's time. And it's potentially harmful to, economic efficiency as well. What if they would have been doing something really amazing and useful, not just to themselves, but to the rest of society during their time, but you kept the basic income so low that they had to go out and get a job and earn their money. That's a huge loss. There's the loss of freedom, but it's just a waste of people's time. You're forcing people to waste their time. There's only so much freedom you can give people, because like I said, there's work that needs to be done. You got to get people to do that work. But why give them less than what you can give them? It doesn't make sense. So yeah, that's an important thing. Austin says, he wants me to tell everybody more about the book, chapters and topic, etc. So the book is tentatively going to be titled Money, Not Jobs, The Economics of Basic Income. So I gave a talk, Money, Not Jobs, a 10-minute talk that I recorded with Derek, and is on YouTube. You can check that out. But really, there's not going to be stuff about freedom. There's not going to be stuff, except tangentially, right? It's going to be centered on this idea that, you have a market economy, you need a mechanism to get people their money. What's that mechanism going to be? What is our mechanism today? And how does that compare to a basic income? So it's going to draw in stuff from my blog posts, stuff from Boston Basic Income, and stuff from some of the working papers that I have up on the Gresham website. So yeah, I want it to be accessible to as many people as possible. I think basic income is something that people can understand. It's a lot easier to understand, I think, a basic income economy than it is to understand the economy that we're living in now. So my hope is to be able to connect to people on that level, and bring people into this idea of a simpler world, and the idea that we've kind of created unnecessary complexity in our current world. Yeah, go ahead, Austin. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I was just wondering, are you going to use that Elizabeth Warren quote? You used it a few times, where she said, solutions are great, have money, and then doesn't follow through on that thought.
Yeah, the economy only works for the people who have money. She said that during I think one of the debates or something like that. I'd have to find that quote. But yeah, if we have a basic income, then that's everyone, and the economy works for everyone. So let's go to Joan, Robert, and then Eddie. Go ahead, Joan.
Yeah, following on Chance's discussion of prolonged thinking and talking about a subject and the amount of freedom that requires. I mean, just that we were able to do this, so you were able to do this, it's unusual and so welcome, really, because what happens is that the equation is time versus money almost all the time. And certainly as I'm looking back and doing some writing about my past, I'm looking at all the jobs I had and all the ways that I needed to survive, and how much time that took out of what I wanted to do, which was to write. And I'm not alone in this problem of not being able to focus for long periods of time, deeply and thoroughly, on something that's important to me. And that's a big thing. It seems small in a way, I guess, to people that don't want to do that or need to do that. But you have to fight every inch of the way just to get that amount of time and mental space to focus. So I really appreciate what you created. Of course, Alex, it's amazing. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you also for being part of what made it possible for me to spend time thinking about this stuff. I haven't had a job in a really, really long time.
I know.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
part of how I've been able to get away with that is thanks to you. I think a while ago, maybe in 2010, 2011, I said that I would rather, live out of a car in a Walmart parking lot than get a job ever again. Maybe it was a little more, I was still doing some freelance web application development at that point. So maybe it was a little bit after that. But I really, I can't say something like that anymore because I have a daughter. So
absolutely. Yep. Very true. Things change that way. But yeah. And I've heard that too from your dad. No more jobs. That was it for him. He wasn't going to go to an office. He was not going to do it, whatever it took. To maintain that focus on what he loved and needed to do.
Yeah.
Not easy.
So for people who don't know, I started thinking about basic income in 2011, and that was the same year that my dad died. So I didn't really get a chance to kind of talk to him about this stuff, but it would have been fun.
It would have been great. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go to Robert, Eddie, and then Bethany. Go ahead, Robert.
Thanks, Alex. I'm something of a late comer to Boston Basic Income, and I've enjoyed while I've been here, and I've become an admirer of yours, Alex. I've appreciated everything you've said and done. I think it's been wonderful. I do have a question. Have you ever questioned your adherence to the basic income idea?
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, no, and then in another sense, I'm always questioning it. So
that's good. That's good.
Yeah. So I guess the way I kind of reconcile those two things is that instead of focusing on whether basic income is a good idea, just kind of in general. I mean, if you asked me whether it was, I would say yes. But kind of in my mind, the way I think about it is that there are various tools to get people money in the economy, and basic income is one of them. So the question is, what is the optimal level of basic income? And some people might argue that it's zero, that the appropriate level of basic income for our economy is zero. That would take some convincing to convince me of that. But I'm not married to any one particular number or anything like that. Instead, I kind of think of it as we have these various mechanisms that we use. And if you're going to convince me that the appropriate level of basic income for the economy is zero, then you also have to convince me of what the alternative is going to be, because we're not going to have an economy without a mechanism to get money to consumers. That would be, the economy would quickly collapse and we'd come up with some mechanism to get money to consumers. So right now, a big part of that mechanism is the, expansionary monetary policy, low interest rates, credit expansion in the private financial sector, stimulating job growth, propping up consumers and propping up demand. So I think that would be a tall order to convince me that that way of doing things is going to be better than basic income. But I'm always open to new ideas.
I was going to say that the life we're living at the moment in the present economic system stops us from all being human. There's something that in there that doesn't allow us to be what we should be. So I think we need to investigate that more.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I like to say the economy exists for the benefit of the people. That gets me into some trouble sometimes. But really what it means is that the economy describes how we allocate resources, and we wouldn't allocate resources the way we do unless it benefited us to do so. And then the question is, can we do better? And who is it benefiting? And all of that. So is there something dehumanizing about the economy? Potentially. I mean, we, evolutionarily, we did not evolve to live in this kind of world, biologically speaking. Culturally, we've adapted plenty, but genetically, we're still the same people we were, thousands of years ago. So and maybe what we evolved was kind of an adaptability. We can also imagine that, we can't go back to the way things were, because in order for the planet to have the carrying capacity to support 10 billion people, we need some of this resource use efficiency that we get from, kind of a modern market economy that we simply couldn't get in a large scale economy, right? We couldn't get in kind of small scale societies. If we all went back to small scale societies, we'd destroy the planet even faster, right? It's the whole organic farm thing, right? Like if all our food was organic, that would be terrible for the environment. What we are meant to be, I don't know what we're meant to be. I kind of try not to have an opinion on that. But we can ask what it means for people to be better off, to be more prosperous, to be living more fulfilling lives, and how do we maximize that? There's certainly resource constraints on that, but we're using our resources so inefficiently that I don't think we're anywhere near those resource constraints. So we're limiting people, we're limiting what's possible unnecessarily by not having a basic income.
Thank you, Alex. I've thoroughly enjoyed Boston Basic Income the short time I've been here. So thanks for doing that. It's great.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. So let's go Eddie, and then Bethany, and then Martin.
I just wanted to say, thanks, Alex. I mean, this discussion group has been really great for helping me to develop my thinking on capital consumption theory. I did an episode here, and I remember Alex asked me a question, and I'm not sure if you remember this, but I was talking about the paradox of worker consumer, and I was talking about it as a runaway feedback loop. And Alex asked me, are you sure it's a runaway feedback loop? And on the show I said, I'm not sure about that. And I went back and thought about it and realized that it's not a runaway feedback loop, but it is a stable feedback loop over time that it's a toggle. It stays in one state. Lots of, we talked about another thing that I've gotten from talking with Alex was, on our Discord chat, and we came into talking about, what if the Treasury printed money and spent it? So I said, I have to think about this. And I did a little thought experiment. What if the Treasury printed money and spent it instead of having the Fed print money? And, I came around to the conclusion that you would end up with the same system with the Treasury and Fed, having swapped their jobs and having the Treasury print lots of money instead of the Fed printing lots of money, and then having the Fed borrow lots of money instead of the Treasury borrowing lots of money. And another conclusion that I realized from that is that, it's popular to say for people to talk about how the Fed is lowering interest rates. I've come to the conclusion that if you think about how much money the Treasury is borrowing, it is actually more than the Fed is printing. And so the conclusion to that is that, if you took both of those out of the picture, and you had sort of a natural market economy, our current interest rate would actually be somehow lower than it actually is right now, which is sort of mind-boggling. But in conclusion, I've really enjoyed this. I really appreciate that you decided to do this discussion group in 2 years ago. So this has been great, and I look forward to continuing to talk with you on Discord and Twitter, and looking forward to everything else that you're doing in the future. You're always welcome to come on my discussion group if you happen to have time for that. I think Robert asked me about the that was directed to me, the name. Oh, great. Is that may be directed to you? So yeah, thanks, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. I probably will want to check out your discussion group at some point. So thanks for the invitation. So Robert is asking about the name Gresham. So Gresham comes from, it's G-R-E-S-H-M, but it comes from Gresham with an A, G-R-E-S-H-A-M. And that comes from Gresham's law, which is a principle in economics that the overvalued currency drives the undervalued currency out of circulation. So if you have two currencies that have different values in many contexts, and then there are contexts in which they're forced to have the same value, you're going to spend the one that has less value in the outside context. So a clear example of this, so this is called Gresham's law. A clear example of this is when we switched in the United States from silver quarters to base metal quarters. Suddenly in the 1960s, all the new quarters were made out of copper and zinc. And if you go to the store and you have some silver quarters in your pocket and you have some of the new quarters in your pocket, which ones are you going to spend? You're going to spend the ones that aren't silver. You're going to hold on to the silver quarters. So another way of framing this that people like to do is the bad money drives out the good. So the bad money is the non-silver money, and the silver money is the so-called good money. So the stuff we trade that we actually spend in the market is going to be the stuff, if there's a context in which they have to be accepted at the same value. If you're at a store where 25 cents is 25 cents, you're not going to spend the silver quarters. You're going to save it for a context in which you can get more value out of the silver quarter. So that's called Gresham's law. The reason I adopted that name for Project Gresham was because in 2015, I had an idea for how to implement a basic income that involved issuing a currency that was an IOU for dollars, or instruments that were IOUs for dollars, and those new dollars would trade at par in certain contexts. But since they were just an IOU for dollars, in other contexts, you would need the real dollars. So you'd save the real dollars for those other contexts. So you'd have this Gresham's law effect. So that's where it came from. So you could read about that on the gresham.org website. There's a tab called the Gresham system, which explains, kind of this idea for implementing a basic income through it's kind of a new currency, or it's kind of like another way to think about it is that it's a payment system with a built-in basic income in it, where you've got limitations on withdrawing money from the payment system. So let's go to Bethany, and then Martin, and then Derek.
I know how much care you put into this, so it's really cool to see. Sorry, hold on 1 second. Can you go to some?
Yeah, let's go to Martin and then Bethany and then Derek.
So yeah, this has been a really great group. In a little bit keeping in the theme, someone said kind of like a waste of time because you'd had to do something alternative in order to get money, alternative to what you would actually do. And one could look at that as a waste of time. There's a lot of other ways you could look at that as well, like a loss of creativity. And when you consider how many, certainly in the arts, I mean, the history is just full of individuals who created their best art when they weren't making any money for it. They weren't getting paid for it. And many, historically have gone away, never made any significant money. And yet they've produced what, perhaps later or whatever is highly valued. So there's all that potential loss of creativity that could be out there. And where the right balance is, again, I'm in a little bit different place on this sort of the fourth industrial thing. But the group has produced an awful lot of really high quality discussion that helps think about these kinds of issues that I happen to think are going to become critically important in the years ahead. And I'd forgotten completely about the Facebook thing. I do remember seeing you in the library there. It's like I feel like a Luddite in a bit, but a little bit. And yet I'm the guy who was using the predecessor to the World Wide Web before most people had any idea what any of this internet stuff was. But I never did come big on Facebook, and I'm not going to say that I've been vindicated here recently, with some of the talk, but no, I didn't go quite in that. I actually do have a Facebook account. I should admit that, but I never use it. And someday I'll look at it. And I'll say a little bit kudos to Alex. Again, when we talk about creating all the best work and not getting paid for it, look at all the contribution that Alex has made to all this really high quality discussion and creating a forum, and didn't get paid for it. And yet, I can only speak for myself, but for a lot of people, I think on this group, I've gotten a lot of value out of being able to be a participants in this group. Alex, and I guess, maybe I'm speaking to the choir a little bit, but oftentimes for the meetings, set up a couple of short reads, couple of short articles, and that could use as sort of stepping off points for the discussion. And I always found those very valuable. As much as you didn't see me as much recently, I actually do follow what's been going on. And obviously I was following enough to, as soon as I saw the topic of this meeting, I thought, oh, I can't miss this one. And I found those sort of little reading assignments very beneficial. I'm kind of more of a reader, kind of note taker reader, and study that way. And I gained a lot of value from the group by what I put into both the further reading and researching a lot of those articles that you brought into the discussion, Alex. Again, I think you're sort of you're walking the walk, so to speak, in a way that's been very beneficial, and I'm sure you'll continue to be real kind of an authority or a really thoughtful. I don't want to say thoughtful thinker. It just sounds like repeating myself. But you'll be bringing a lot of quality into the discussion. It's a discussion that we're all better for, and it'll become increasingly important, I think, in the future. And so really, thanks a lot, and thanks for walking the walk.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Certainly, this is not an end for me. It's a beginning. So Boston Basic Income is kind of a stepping stone to what's next. And I have a lot of work to do. When I first when I was first doing these, I had the idea that I would write a blog post about each one, kind of pulling out the key ideas. I did like 12 of those or something, but there are 171 of these discussions, and that's more than 12. So I'm going to be going back to watch some of this content and to process it more and really get some of the useful stuff out there that hasn't gotten out there yet. So there's more beyond that. So I'm excited about what's next. I'm excited about kind of having the free time or freeing up some time to kind of focus on some of that as well. Let's go back to Bethany and then Derek and then Richard.
Hey, Alex. So I was just saying before that it's really, I know that you've put a lot of care into these, as other people have said, and making them really fruitful for people. And it's been cool to see the kinds of impacts that you've had on others and the influences that you've had. That's been really nice to hear about tonight. So congrats on a great run. And I've certainly learned a lot from them too. So thanks a lot.
All right. And thank you, Bethany, because Bethany provided this is Bethany's office right here that I'm sitting in. And she provided at least gave us the lead on that open conference room in the basement of this building for our original discussions, and obviously contributed way more than just logistics. So thank you, Bethany. Let's go to Derek, Richard, and then Conrad.
Once again, I'm just really grateful for being able to be a part of this group, for the ideas, which would have been nice just on their own to learn about, but also the way that they were discussed, the way Alex ran the group and the way everyone contributed. It's pretty unusual to find a discussion group with such a high level of discussion on a very technical subject, but at the same time was very open to anyone who showed up, no restrictions on who could join, and very few restrictions on what direction we could take the discussion in. We were on topic, but people were very, we had a variety of different views in here. And some of my favorite episodes were the ones where people who had never heard of this perspective at all, and were very unfamiliar with basic income, came on and really got to ask a lot of questions, a lot of hard questions. It was great to see the gears turning. So it was a wonderful experience. I'm personally, very committed to seeing at least some form of these ideas getting put into practice, hopefully in my lifetime. I'd very much like to see that. So when that occurs, I'll say if or when that occurs, I hope that we can all get together and celebrate that with a drink sometime. So thanks again, guys. This has been great.
All right. Thanks so much, Derek. And thanks for co-hosting for all the time that you did. That was huge as well. Let's go to Richard and then Conrad. Going once, going twice on Richard. All right, Conrad, you're up, and we can get back to you, Richard, if you have anything you want to say.
Hey, man, I don't think I'm going to survive that night when basic income happens, the celebration of it. I'll at least be hurting the next morning. Something you said before, Alex, really rang true for me. The whole, no more jobs, you and your dad feeling. I feel like being a full-time UBI advocate. I mean, it happened pretty early on, but now I'm definitely pretty ruined for jobs as society understands them now. So better make this work. I don't know if I ever said it on your show, but I have a habit of people ask why I'm doing this, and I was an actor or engineer or whatever, and I would always say, well, it's too hard to be an actor in the world as it is. I figured I needed to fix the economy first so that it was possible to be an actor. And they always act like, ha, you're just, yeah, that's funny, but I'm kind of serious. I think one of the things I wanted to leave the group with is, this idea kept coming up that it's, you said at one point something about experts, Alex, you're most interested in experts. And I think that's incredibly important for some of the people who are very into the ideas you've espoused and in the group. I would say to just always keep in mind that, getting it done's going to be messy, and it's going to have to be adaptive and creative at all times. And it's very good to have the experts and the people pushing the edges of thought to keep everyone sort of on the rails, but it's also very important not to become like the MMT people, which I don't say in this group, but to become sort of zealot minded and it has this way or the highway, and not like see the benefit in adaptive approaches. To me, I see CMT as something that's like an ideal to strive for. It makes a lot of sense to me, and what it makes me wonder is what's the best way, or what's going to end up being the working way to get there. You know, if there's a hard line sort of mentality of this is going to have to, the policy that goes through Congress has to look just like this, it's going to be detrimental to your health as someone pushing for a movement. You have to realize that you have to see the benefit in the steps, like what you guys were talking about before, you know, the child tax credit and all the shift in the Overton window that represents is a very huge thing. So I see my work as trying to help lay the grounds for these more philosophical or more technical long-term shifts by laying the philosophical ground and understanding that, you know, in order to do this, you do need the experts to understand and fill out the idea, but you have to bring along the public, and that's a really hard and messy thing to do. But I'm encouraged by, you know, just how much time and effort and care you and the group have put into this. It makes me feel like you are the sorts of people that will keep pushing and will stay flexible. Every conversation I was in, I felt, you know, welcomed and part of the conversation, and it felt productive. So yeah, just a reminder to everyone that when stuff is good, don't get a big head, and when stuff is bad, don't become a zealot. Let's just keep pushing, and we'll all get there together. And lastly, thanks for bringing me on several times to plug my stuff and share my thoughts and be part of the discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Conrad. I think that's a good comment to end on. And I think you're exactly right that, you know, we need all of these components. We need activists, and we need movements, and we need politicians, and we need experts too. And that happens to be the area where I feel like I can engage with most, partly because it's what's most exciting to me. But you know, if all you have is experts and you don't have anyone kind of pushing for the change, you're not going to get anywhere either. So it takes all of that. And it takes the kind of stuff you're doing. It takes the kind of stuff that Andrew Yang is doing. It takes the kind of stuff that Scott Santens is doing. But I also like that you emphasized not becoming zealots. I think sometimes when you're being activists or you're you know, pushing a movement, it can become almost necessary to oversimplify for the purpose of kind of making it easier to take that action and push that movement. And we have to be careful about finding the right balance, because, you know, some of that simplification is necessary. Some of it, you know, it can maybe get in the way of making progress as well. And that's something that that I'm concerned about. Because I see some of the simplification in the basic income movement as being not the right simplification, as being counterproductive. Like when people say things like, oh, you know, when people have basic income, you know, they won't quit their jobs or something like that. Those kinds of arguments feel counterproductive to me, and that they lead to dead ends, kind of. So I don't know. It's complicated. I think thinking about how to approach getting basic income implemented is a lot more complicated, actually, than understanding basic income itself and the economics of basic income, which I really, you know, like, I hope I can get to the point where, you know, I can walk up to anyone and, you know, really convey how simple this thing is and how it's an alternative to a really complicated system that we have now. But yeah, this has been great, you guys. And everyone who's here, you know, me talking to myself, I can only get so far for so long. And it's a lot more interesting to me to engage with all of you and everyone who's been on here over the years. And that's really kind of what I was hoping, an environment that I was hoping to create. And I really do feel like Boston Basic Income has succeeded way above and beyond, the minimum of what I could have hoped for, or the maximum of what I could have hoped for. The minimum was I talked to Bethany for 2 hours in a conference room, and maybe we go home and laugh about it. But this was much, much more than that. So thanks, everybody. That's it. We're done.
Thanks, Alex. Yay.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you.
Well done, sir.
So I'm ending the